after 40 years of study from a scholarly standpoint, that liberal democracy is the best way, and I believe the only way, to fully ensure human dignity.
Larry Diamond, thank you so much for joining me on 20-Minute Leaders. Really great to have you.
It's great to be with you.
Wonderful. Okay, Larry, Senior Fellow at Hoover Institute, Senior Fellow at the Friedman Spogli Institute at Stanford University. Beautiful background behind you. We've known each other for quite some time now, most prominently through the incredible class, The Spirit of Democracy, that you taught me in the beginning of the year, which gave me a 10-week deep dive into what is democracy, what is the amazing work that you've been doing there with your colleagues. And I can't wait for this 20 minutes to talk about democracy and where we're headed as a world. So maybe just give me a little bit of brief down of who are you and why are you even interested in democracy?
Well, I'm a senior fellow at the institution over my shoulder, the Hoover Institution on War, Revolution, and Peace, and at the Freeman Spogli Institute. I'm a professor by courtesy of political science and sociology at Stanford, and I co-edit the Journal of Democracy. And obviously, I care about democracy. I believe in freedom and individual dignity, and I have always believed from a philosophical standpoint. But now I know, after 40 years of study from a scholarly standpoint, that liberal democracy is the best way, and I believe the only way, to fully ensure human dignity.
Okay, so you're saying, I heard freedom, I heard human dignity, and then liberal democracy. Why is there the word liberal in front of the word democracy?
Well, you had earlier hoped that I would define democracy, so let me do it in this way. A democracy is a system of government in which people can choose their leaders and replace their leaders in free and fair elections. If you don't have that, you can't get real political accountability. Maybe you can pressure on a semi-authoritarian regime, but without the ability to remove leaders who misperform and put competing policy options to the citizenry in regular, free and fair elections, you can't ensure political accountability, and you are very likely to slide rapidly down the path of tyranny and abuse of power and abuse of human rights. At the same time, the political dimension of competition and accountability through the, let's be honest, fairly crude and limited instrument, indispensable though it is, of regular free and fair elections is not enough. And the liberal dimension is everything else. It's ensuring that you have very extensive rights of speech, press, association, that you have a strong rule of law in which the courts are fully independent, that you have a strong constitutional order that will defend human dignity and provide at least means to correct the kinds of abuses of human rights that we're now seeing in too many American cities, targeted against African Americans in particular, and that you can at least pursue the goal, difficult though it is to achieve, of social, economic, and political equality, and some reasonable degree of justice.
Right. So a big part of it is the people's wish, right? The people's vote and the people's the human dignity, and a huge part of that is information. Is the dissemination of information. If we look 20, 30 years ago, there was one or two channels in which information was disseminated. pretty countable in a lot of areas in the world of is that information accurate or not. Now, every kid with a TikTok account or an Instagram or a Facebook, those are news channels. They're no longer social media channels. To me, they're news channels because I consider myself an educated being. I'm all about democracy and I'm all about information. I get so much of my news from my social media feeds, even without knowing it, just because it's there. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen over the past 40 years going forward with how do we deal with this information around the world, especially considering the 2016 elections and the upcoming election and so on?
Well, there's the eternal challenge of ensuring freedom of information and a plurality of information. It's not just that people have access to information. There needs to be the freedom to gather, report, convey, distill, and opinionate in terms of information. And I say it's an eternal challenge because once again, we're seeing a war on independent media, often a deadly one, by autocrats around the world who don't want to be held accountable, don't want to have their corruption and abuse of power exposed.
I believe there was just a prime minister who almost tried to get a journalist into jail in a specific country that I'm related with, but...
Well, and, Israel is not even close to being the worst offender, even among so-called democracies, not to mention all the other countries of the Middle East. But we're seeing pressure on the independent media, even in countries that have been considered liberal democracies. And I'm sorry to say that now we have a president of the United States who has contempt for independent media, has called them purveyors of fake news and enemies of the people. And this gives succor, comfort and encouragement to autocrats around the world who want to subdue and completely control independent media.
What is your reaction to this? And political scientists like yourselves who are watching as, the leader of the free world is perhaps steering very rapidly away from the so-called liberal democracy which we're aiming for?
Well, I have been, ever since his illiberal and populist election campaign in 2015, 2016, and in particular, since he assumed the presidency and began to bring these themes of disinformation, intolerance, contempt for opposition, contempt for independent institutions and independent media into the White House, I've been increasingly disturbed, angered, and horrified by what he's been doing. I think increasingly it represents a danger not only to our democratic values, but to our institutions, which you see in the way he's been running roughshod over separation of powers, misusing the military, misusing the Justice Department, dividing the country, firing inspectors general, and anyone who would try to hold him and his administration to account. So I think civil society here and elsewhere needs to stand up to this, and people from across the political spectrum need to rally behind common principles, bedrock minimum principles of not just democracy, but liberal democracy, which include tolerance, pluralism, respect for the independence of the media, civil society, and accountability institutions, and a rule of law. But Michael, I did not want to neglect the other half of your question, which revolves around the new era we are in with social media. And that challenge is fresh because before we thought it was enough to just have independent media. They would constitute an arena of pluralism of information and contestation of ideas and maybe there would be some irresponsibility and sensationalism in the midst of it, but people would kind of ferret it out. In the era of social media, with the extraordinary precision and power of targeting, micro-targeting, and the algorithms that the social media platforms generate to do this, and the anonymity of many of the purveyors of this information, right, or as we saw in the 2016 election campaign, the deliberate disguising of the sources of this disinformation, we're really in a new and much more dangerous era.
So that's, I mean, it's sad to think that, but I'm now thinking ahead. Okay, so I'm in the realm of the millennial generation or Generation Z and Y. What is our responsibility here? Because honestly, I think that most of the people that I'm around, we can all vouch for democracy, don't really know what democracy is. I'm very fortunate to have been in your class and to have listened to you passionately explain to us also the amazing work that I would love to get to, the American One Room work that you've done. But what is our responsibility now as educated young adults who are entering the workforce, and except for the act of voting, the once every 4 years, what do we need to do in order to ensure that we're moving in the right direction? Because it sounds like this is now a nationwide arena. It's no longer just the politicians that have to work it out amongst themselves.
Well, let me first come to the information and then I'll come to the action. We all need to be better educated and better informed, and to be well informed, to be intelligently informed, and I'd say to be responsibly informed in a democracy. We can't be passively informed, and by passively I mean allow the main or principal or only sources of our information to be what is conveyed to us increasingly, I repeat, through micro-targeting in algorithmic formulas that constrain what we're getting and give us what they think is going to entertain or outrage us, but fixate our attention on their website. And so we need to be proactive to seek out multiple sources of information and to, check and verify the information we're getting, which means getting on others, engaging in creative and intensive information searches to check out assertions and try to assess and validate the authenticity and credibility of some of the claims that are being made before we retweet them, repeat them, or post them on our various social media sites.
Is that feasible to ask of a 20-year-old to check sources?
Yes, it is. I think we can ask it of a 15-year-old. And if you doubt me, please interview my colleague in the School of Education, Sam Weintraub, who has been working to develop protocols and educational tools for Sam Weinberg, develop educational tools for young people to learn how to confirm or assess or validate the claims they're seeing on the internet and not just swallow them wholesale and therefore become at least unwitting purveyors of misinformation. But in addition, on the action side, Michael, don't dismiss the importance of that voting once every 4 years. It's the last line of defense for political accountability, good governance, and the protection of civil liberties. But in addition, we've seen it in the last 2 weeks since the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, that civil society action, peaceful, nonviolent, disciplined, coordinated, impassioned civil society action can make a difference and can bring about social change. We saw it in the civil rights movement in the United States. We saw it with the women's suffragist movement in the United States.
Right.
You saw it with the anti-war movement in the United States. And I think we are entering a period of profound, creative, renewing social and political reform in the United States.
That gives me a lot of optimism. And Larry, one of the main themes that we were discussing in our sessions was this idea of polarization, and how do we bring people together of polarized opinions into the same room, and to be able to have educated discussions, and to really listen and not just to be present. And you ran a fascinating experiment, you can call it, or I think it's much greater than just an experiment. And the word experiment doesn't give justice to the amazing work that you and Professor Fishkin did. America in One Room, bringing together people from all different sides. Talk to me about that. What was that about?
Well, I was privileged to be part of a very imaginative and far-reaching exercise in Dallas, Texas last year, led by my colleague James Fishkin in the Department of Communication at Stanford, to bring 526 randomly selected Americans of all ethnicities and parties and ideological persuasions and diverse places in the United States together for much of 4 days to deliberate on some of the major issues facing the United States in terms of healthcare, the economy, immigration, the environment, and foreign policy. And this was another iteration of the model of deliberative polling that Jim Fishkin has developed and applied over 100 times in more than a dozen countries.
Wow.
And what we found is what Jim and his deputy director, Alice Sue, of the Center for Deliberative Democracy, and others have found when they've done these things, that when you bring people together under good conditions, where they have access to well-researched and balanced issue briefing papers, and where they can hear different points of view in plenary sessions on the issues, and where they can interact and talk about the issues respectfully in small groups with people who come from different places and may have different opinions, their opinions change. And we found generally on a lot of issues, not all, but on a striking number of issues, that people, that polarization reduced on the issues. If there was change,
it was dramatic, right?
Toward less polarization, with Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives coming together, either by moving more toward one position than the other, or moving towards some, kind of creative common ground. And not least, Michael, in importance, when people got to know one another, we had people who said, I've never, an African-American woman who said, I've never interacted like this with a white person before, and vice versa, or a white person, from a rural area. They see them as human beings. And affective polarization, this emotional tribalism, attenuates. And that's very important for the future of our democracy.
I think one of the most touching questions from the survey afterwards that I really resonated with was how it wasn't exactly that, but it was around how do you think the other side is willing to listen to you? It was of that nature.
Yeah.
That was a dramatic shift. All of a sudden you see Republicans who are shifting and saying, yeah, Democrats are listening to us. Democrats are saying the same things about Republicans. And to me, that was much more powerful than any shift on any topic. It was about this essence of, are we willing to collaborate with the other side, to acknowledge the differences, but acknowledge that at the end we're all citizens of this wonderful country, of this wonderful world, and we have a shared responsibility to reach a resolution and to better the lives of all the citizens. I can't believe 20 minutes is almost up. I have to leave with the last questions. It always sucks that it ends so quickly, and I only get about a third of what I want to talk about. But Larry, I would love to hear 3 words that you would describe yourself as, or if I would ask any of your students, how would they describe Larry Diamond as?
Well, you'll have to ask them, but I would describe myself first as a Democrat with a small d. I believe deeply that liberal democracy is the best form of government and a precondition for achieving social justice and human dignity. I'm very proud of the coincidence that my parents left me unwittingly, that my initials, Larry Diamond, are the same initials as liberal democracy. But secondly, I am a reformer. I am an activist. I'm not a revolutionary, but I do believe we need to struggle for change. And third, I think of myself as a scholar, but most of all as a teacher, trying to convey these ideas both to my students and a wider community of students around the world. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to do it here.
No, Larry, and I want to use this opportunity to thank you again for the incredible inspiration that you've provided me personally and everybody else in my classes, and I'm sure that you teach at Stanford. I'll never forget the very first session. It was Monday morning, the first quarter of my freshman year, and I walk into the Spirit of Democracy class, and you're standing in front of us talking about what the class will be about. And within about 5 or 6 minutes, you go down the path of the America in One Room, and we see the passion in your eyes. And I believe you even started tearing up a little bit. And we looked at each other afterwards, and we said, "Wow! So this is where we came to." And so I want to thank you for that inspiration, and I'll take that with me wherever I go. And I look forward to maintaining this relationship over many, many years.
Me too. Thank you, Michael.
Take care. Bye-bye.